Hello and welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 15. That means we've done 15 in a row, which is amazing because I thought by now one of us would be deposed and the other excommunicated. So who's ever watching isn't paying attention. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today is October 24th, 2011.
Today in history, we're going to mark a predominant educational, well, you'd say seminary, you'd say school, it's a bunch of other things, but one of your many alma maters has its birthday today, George. So bring us up to date.
Well, you know, today in history is the most important segment we do, viewers tell us. And that's why today we are celebrating the 310th anniversary of Yale University. Boola boola, boola boola. And I've got my tie on and everything.
Oh,
see,
wow.
that's why. Doesn't stand for Yankees, it stands for Yale.
Yeah, that's right. You graduated Yale. You went to Yale Divinity, right?
Yes, for my sins, I was sent to Yale Divinity School. In 1701, people thought Harvard was too liberal. It was too squishy. There are a lot of these girls that were walking around, didn't shave their armpits or legs, and, you know, just little odd people. Yeah. So they decided to form a right-thinking school down in New Haven, Connecticut. Little did they know that all the fruits and nuts at Harvard would soon make their way to Yale 310 years ago today.
Hard to believe we could think of you as less squishy, but okay, I got it. All right, cool. Yeah, that's amazing. Now, people right now think of Yale as being a very liberal institution, and it is, but in its heyday of theology, Yale University happened to have some very good professors. You had a couple of them.
Yes, when I studied at Yale Divinity School, for instance, my Old Testament professor was Brevard Childs, who's since passed on, one of the great names of Old Testament scholarship. Christopher Seitz was one of my professors. Sure. And Philip Turner was the dean of the seminary those are with the Anglican Communion Institute right now. My theology professor, who I studied systematic theology was Avery Dulles, who for his sins became a cardinal. Yale has not always been a basket case. There was a time when it has always produced strange people, but at the same time, it has done a great deal to further the gospel of Jesus Christ in this world. Yeah, we just have to remember that in 310 years, you're going to have a few bad seasons.
In the past, people would get water from the river. It was a very difficult time because the water was very dirty. Livestock would walk in it, and it made a lot of people sick.
Typically, a household in this area would walk 5-10 kilometers to a riverbed just like this, dig a hole in the sand, and wait for the water to seep in, and then gather it 1 cupful at a time and pour it into a plastic jug. They'll spend half the day doing that and then carry those jugs all the way home. Think of how much more productive that person would be if he didn't have to spend those hours just finding water.
What happens is that you go to a village where these people don't have water. You can see from the time you meet with a small kid walking with jerry cans, you can tell that these people, they desperately need water.
You're talking about working amongst people who very rarely see water actually flowing on the ground. So when the drilling rig comes in and you spend a day, 2, 3, drilling deeper and deeper and deeper, and you finally reach that point where water starts to come from the ground. And people are standing around watching, and the stones and the rocks are coming out, and a little bit of water, a little bit of moisture, and then a little bit more. And pretty soon, poof, the water starts blowing up with the drilling air. Oh man, what an exciting time that is. Quite often there's a lot of dancing and singing, and of course as the water's running on the ground, everybody brings anything that will hold water to come and collect it, and all the animals come to drink. That's the fun part of the job.
So once they get the water, the joy that fills their heart is transferred to me. It's like, sometimes it feels like it's me who's getting a new borehole, you know.
On to some new news, George. Well, no, it's not new. It's old. It's new. It's old. It's the same news over and over again. Now we just learned this week, October 11th, that the province or diocese of Sydney has said no to the Anglican covenant. Mm-hmm. We've watched this Anglican covenant kind of form and unform itself over the last 2 or 3 years. We dealt with it in Jamaica and stuff like that. But basically, the consensus was in Sydney was that this is the wrong approach to the crisis in the communion. Their quote is, "The proposed covenant had seriously theological flaws, and it just won't work. It won't stop the crisis." And I think we've learned that that's very true, because it really tries to take on a papal cloak instead of trying to really solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right, Kevin. And I do think the Anglican covenant is dead. See, what we're seeing a convergence of liberal criticism and conservative criticism. A number of dioceses in New Zealand and the United States and liberal groups have said, no, the covenant is un-Anglican. It's creating a curia, a system of enforced conformity from the center in Rome, and we are not going to stand for it. Now, conservatives have started off by saying, we don't trust this document to do anything. We think it's just another piece of paper creating another layer of bureaucracy. But Mark Thompson, professor of theology at Moore College in Sydney, put together a 40-odd page paper, and he moved the motion in the Sydney Synod to say no. And he said there were 5 theological objections to the covenant. But deep down, Thompson's argument is that the Bible should be the model for our reconciliation and for our life together, not another layer of bureaucracy. Yeah. It's not going to work. We need to return to the Anglican formularies, the creeds, the Bible, not add something else on top of them to try to get people to hang together.
And that's really true. One of the biggest problems is if everybody could sign this document, then it doesn't have any bite to it. It doesn't have any purpose.
And the other thing is, it keeps changing. The goals keep being moved. Central Florida, my diocese, Western Louisiana, South Carolina, the Diocese of Nelson in Australia, early on said, yes, we endorse the covenant. But that covenant keeps changing. Yeah. When it went to Kingston, Jamaica, it was not passed, and I think, Kevin, AnglicanTV was one of its great days, that filming of that disastrous session, where you basically showed the dysfunction of the communion. And they kicked it into a committee, who then created a super committee, the Anglican Communion Standing Committee, to be the Pope, the Curia, to take control of this whole process. So
thankfully,
it's just a mess.
They put a bunch of conservatives on that committee. That's what really helped it. And that is the mess. We've reached the point now, and I remember this quote a long time ago, play the mad Master Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England. This is the Church of England, as I trust shall never be put out. Well, I think we've met the man in Rowan Williams who may be able to distinguish this. I don't know.
Well, I use an English phrase. Rowan Williams is not Master Ridley. He's a damp squib.
George, we need to thank the Episcopal Church. Once again, we have more stories every week to report, and we're going to report a central theological tenet of the Christian faith. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23. There was a character, well, there are many characters, but one of the characters we were talking about is Pelagius. Pelagius was from the 5th century, and he decided that some of these strict tenets of the faith aren't so strict after all, and that original sin isn't really a matter for Christians to worry about, that actually works and the law can get you into heaven. He was kicked out of the church. Now we have the Diocese of Atlanta putting forth a resolution saying, wait a second, he's still got other teachings that are really concurrent, and we need to be more respectful and let him back in. What do we really know about Pelagius, George?
We don't know much of anything about Pelagius. We do know the Council of Carthage said he was a heretic.
That's right.
He taught wrong doctrine. Now, I know that shouldn't bother the Episcopal Church, but he was somebody the Church decided was not a Christian teacher. His principal theological opponent was Augustine, St. Augustine. And Pelagius was the 4th century a model for the gospel of the Millennium Development Goals. Yes. That you can earn your way into heaven by giving 0.7% of your income to the Episcopal Church. That good intentions are all that count. See, there's so many, on the one level, this is a silly story. Diocesan Resolution R11-7 of the Diocese of Atlanta Convention wants to say that Pelagius is a good teacher for Christians. Well, first off, who is the Diocese of Atlanta to overturn the Council of Carthage? And second of all, it speaks to me of the utter pointlessness of so much of what church government is about. Diocesan conventions, General Convention's 10 days, it costs millions of dollars, and they pass a book this thick of resolutions that nobody reads or pays attention to or cares about. They pass resolutions about Mumia Abu-Jamal, let's free a Philadelphia cop killer. What an utter waste of time. When the church has its business to be done, they're doing nonsense like Pelagius and so on.
Well, one of the biggest issues is we do have a lack of writings. When you're a heretic in the church, thankfully, they destroy everything you've done, and or they don't really put it in a museum anywhere. You're teaching heresy. We don't need anybody to get the wrong ideas about such a Christian ethic as original sin. Another big point here is if the Episcopal Church can let Pelagius in, who can't they let back into the church?
Oh, Jack Eicher, Bob Duncan. There are lots of heretics in the Episcopal Church's mind who will never be saved, but Pelagius, of course, should be saved. Kevin, there's a terrible story out of China that has just gone viral across the internet, and I'm sure our viewers have seen it or heard about it. It was about a 2-year-old, a toddler in China, who wandered in a market and was run over by a van, very badly injured, and 18 people walked past the body, the bruised, bleeding body of this child as she lay dying in the street, and they did nothing.
It's a story that's deeply unsettled millions in China. Footage of a 2-year-old girl hit by a van and left bleeding in the street by passers-by. Footage too graphic to be shown. The entire accident is caught on camera. The driver pauses after hitting the child, his back wheels seen resting on her for over a second. Within 2 minutes, 3 people pass 2-year-old Wang Yu by. The first walks around the badly injured toddler completely. Others look at her before moving off. Already suffering, a second van is then captured driving over Wang Yu's legs. In the end, over a dozen people walk past the badly injured child before she's helped. There was more outcry when Wang Yu's father claimed the driver of one of the vans had offered him money, but to avoid jail, wouldn't hand himself in. In an interview with a local TV station, the driver of the white van admitted it would cost him more money in compensation if the girl lived. The CCTV has sparked a discussion and raised questions about social morality in China, a nation where a young life can apparently be destroyed so casually.
And this has been seen by millions of people on the internet. It has sparked tens of thousands of blog post entries asking the question, what is wrong with the people in China?
Yeah, it's really a wake-up call. We here in America have had our wake-up calls, and most countries do, as to where has our society gone. And what we're seeing, or what we're conjecturing on, is the move from communism to capitalism. Communism was always about the collective, and China currently is not communist. They're communist by law, but they're hyper-capitalists by their works. And they have to follow the communist law, which is the collective, but they're working as individuals for themselves. And this little cohesive has left a completely moral void.
Now, we need to give a little bit of context or background here. If this happened in America, in Florida, in New York, or Connecticut, the 18 people who walked past that child, we would immediately assume that they were moral monsters, that there was something wrong with these people. But in China, the law and the culture say walk past. There was a 2006 case in China that I think illustrates the problem, or illustrates the issue. There was a woman at a bus stop, and she slipped and she fell, an old woman, and she broke her hip. Now a young man, I think he was 26, helped her up, took her to the hospital. He played the Good Samaritan. Well, the old woman sued and said, I'm trying to get money out of you because you must have pushed me. Now, he didn't push her, but a judge, and there was no evidence that he did push her, but the judge in the court in Nanking in China said, by the very fact that you were a Good Samaritan, that you helped her, that is a statement of guilt.
Sure.
And therefore, I'm fining you, and you have to pay compensation. So if any one of these 18 people helped that child, the law in China would assume that they ran over the child. And not only do you have this legal environment that is anti-Good Samaritan, it has a moral, ethical foundation in Confucianism. The moral teachings of the philosopher Confucius that have for 3,000 years, until the communist era, have been the basic guiding principles of Chinese life. And there is no Good Samaritan principle in Confucianism. You take care of your family. You honor your father. You're a good person, but you don't really look out for the stranger. No,
and this is why this has been a common practice or teaching throughout human history, is the Good Samaritan that Jesus taught. And we in Western culture are so normalized to the teaching and the understanding that you are good to your neighbor, love thy neighbor. But even in the first century, Jesus had to provide an example of what you do when you come upon these places. It was probably quite the teaching back in the time. Oh, really? We do stop for people who are hurt on the road. Oh, okay. And we as Westerners, we instantly think that that's the common response, is to stop. It's not. And it's not, and it won't be.
Now, I think the importance of this issue, not just because of its shock and horror value, is like the case that we talked about in Iran of Pastor Youssef, who has been sentenced to death for becoming a Christian, and of the terrible persecution Iranian Christians are undergoing. That is serving to build the church in Iran. This incident is causing people in China. There have been millions of blog posts and Twitter messages about this, of people saying, what is wrong with us? What is the meaning of life? You know, to get rich is wonderful, but isn't there more to life than just having a Louis Vuitton purse or Gucci shoes? Yeah. It's turning people spiritually in China, and I think this may serve to build the church.
It is. It's very interesting that this actually made it to communist television, their television. This is state-run media. And that it made it there in the first place and was shown as a major feature story at their kind of 6 o'clock news, really says a lot about China. Everybody in China is like, oh my gosh, what have we done? What are we doing? Where are we going? And what is the meaning of life? And communist leaders indeed fear Christianity, but I think they indeed fear what's going on. You know, that could have been me in the street.
Now, in 1979, the official number of Christians in China was roughly 3 million. roughly the number of Episcopalians in the United States.
Sure.
Now, there are an estimated 50 million Christians in China, and the conservative estimates are that within our lifetime, within the next 20 years, it'll be over 100 million. People in China are seeking meaning and purpose, and they're finding it in Jesus Christ. And the church in China is under severe assault. Some of the church has gone over to the government support. Some are the house churches. But people are looking to Jesus for the answer. Just as the Episcopal Church is tanking because it wants to be part of the culture, the church in China is exploding because it's saying the culture stinks and we need a better way to live.
It's going to be very interesting. I mean, in our lifetimes, we're likely to see the fall of the Episcopal Church. But in our lifetimes, we're going to, obviously see the day when there's 1 billion Christian Chinese, and or 2 billion. It's an amazing thing to watch how persecution is the feeder of faith, and how the Millennium Development Goals are not.
You're absolutely right, and that there was a book a few years ago by Philip Jenkins about global Christianity, saying that Africa is going to be the source and center of Christianity in the 21st century. I think I would challenge that. Not and say it's still going to be America or Europe, but by the end of the 21st century, I think it's going to be China. Yep. China and Africa, and maybe India. That is the arc of our growing Christian world. It's not 815 Second Avenue.
Yeah. And some of the things I've recently read also said North Korea has a very growing Christian population. So, it's going to be very interesting to see the effects of persecution. Here in America, we say, as Anglicans, we say we're persecuted. No, we're not persecuted. We have inconveniences. Mark Lawrence is not being persecuted in the terms of in global terms. He's being persecuted in Western terms. He's not going to die for his faith.
That raises an interesting issue that you and I have discussed amongst ourselves. And that really is, why haven't we seen a greater degree of outrage from the global church about Mark Lawrence's legal difficulties? I think you told me before our broadcast that only the Bishop of Tasmania has gotten out overseas and made a big public statement. Nothing from GAFCON, nothing from the Africans. Do you think it's because they don't care, or do you think other things are going on?
Well, it is the broader question is, well, this is Tech 101, or we don't care, which I don't believe, or Mark Lawrence, you're fighting to stay in tech, we're really not with you in that, or 3, times have changed. We have a different leadership. Akinola is no longer an archbishop. Archbishop Rambi is on his way out. Archbishop Venables is serving a different role. He's no longer the Archbishop of the Southern Cone. Those key players aren't there yet. They've been replaced by Orthodox archbishops. But those archbishops are really dealing with key issues in their own provinces. Right now, the new Archbishop of Nigeria is dealing with this Muslim explosion. Same with the Archbishop of Kenya and Uganda. They're dealing with internal struggles that are killing people. When your church is dying under violence, do you really have time to respond to what's happening to Mark Lawrence here in America? You're busy with other things right now. I have to save my people.
Yeah, remember last month, the primates from the global south all went to China and visited that country. And it really does, to my mind, show that they're not giving up on America. Not at all. But what they're saying is that we've got to put it in right relationship, right perspective. The problems of the Episcopal Church fighting over property, yeah, that's terrible. But we need to put it in conjunction with government persecution in China, murderous persecution in Sudan and Pakistan and Nigeria, and there are only so many hours in the day. And where do we need to put our voice and our moral credibility first? Persecution where it's life and death, or persecution where it's property?
And the reality is, this thing has been set in motion by the Episcopal Church. no matter what, Mark Lawrence and the Diocese of South Carolina is going to end up Anglican somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody, looking at this with open eyes says, this is a win-win for the Diocese of South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible says to be thankful when times are tough, to pray and rejoice that you are being persecuted. Not because you're a masochist, but because this will strengthen the church. It will focus the church. South Carolina is going to come out better for this. They'll spend a lot of money. That's a bad thing. But morally, spiritually, I think South Carolina will be the better for what it's going through right now. It's being purified. It's being refined.
Yeah, and they no longer have to live in limbo. They've always had a gun pointed at their head. And now, thanks to the presiding bishop and the new Title IV disciplinary committee, the gun has been cocked. And so you don't have to worry about whether or not somebody's going to pull the trigger. They're going to pull the trigger. You don't have to worry in that little limbo of, what's going to happen.
And the UU case that we started off with, Pastor Youssef in Iran, Mark Lawrence in South Carolina, different issues, but it's all the same underlying theme of moments when people stop and think, hey, there's a better way.
I'm on the line with Molly Hemingway. She's a writer for the Wall Street Journal and Get Religion. There's a couple other periodicals I've seen your articles in too. Where might I find writings by Molly?
Well, I've freelanced for a variety of different outlets, and I've written some for the Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Christianity Today, and a bunch of other places. Just whoever, I'll write about anything for anybody.
I know, whatever pays the bills, absolutely. That's a good philosophy to have. I was reading an article you did October 7th, I think it was, where you delved into the politics of property in the Episcopal Church. And it was quite an article. What led you to go down this road?
Well, I was actually contacted by the Journal and asked to write about it. They had gotten word about these things called disaffiliation clauses. So when a congregation is working with their former Episcopal diocese or the Episcopal Church to get their property, they usually negotiate a financial settlement. And in recent months, the Episcopal Church has added a new requirement that congregations that leave and pay for their property must also disaffiliate from anything Anglican for 5 years. And it's just a very interesting clause and a new wrinkle, a new thing that these departing congregations are dealing with. And so we looked at what that meant. What does it mean for a congregation to not be allowed to call itself Anglican or have a relationship with a bishop?
Is that something you found unique just to the Episcopal Church?
Well, property disputes are universal, perhaps. I mean, I come from a church body where they are not that we don't have property disputes, mainly because we have a congregational polity. But property disputes aren't new. But these sorts of non-compete clauses, I haven't heard about them prior to this. And they're even new in the wrinkles within the Episcopal Church. So for years, congregations have been leaving and then having their diocese sue them, and then they have to negotiate for the settlement. But even apart from that, these disaffiliation clauses are a new, more recent innovation.
Now, I read where one church agreed to the clause, but most of them are not agreed at all to the clauses. How's that working?
It'll be interesting to see because everyone's in different phases of negotiations. And if the Episcopal Church decides to continue with this, I think you will see more congregations just walking away from their properties, as has happened already in a couple of instances. In Pittsburgh, one church, when they got word that they wouldn't be able to take their property unless they ceased having a relationship with their bishop, they cleaned the congregation, they cleaned the church and turned over the key and walked away. And they had been in that property for many decades. In other cases, I spoke with quite a few people on background who had signed the disaffiliation clause. And they weren't happy about it. They had signed it, but they explained to me that they had almost felt that, so they would be in negotiations for years. Right. And and as you are dealing with that, you have to talk with your congregation, and you might be the vestry that's in charge of negotiations, and you're communicating back and forth and whatnot. And one congregation said, they thought that they'd finally reached settlement, and then right there at the end, they got word that the Episcopal Church itself, not just the diocese that they were negotiating with, but the Episcopal Church itself was demanding this disaffiliation clause, and they were brokenhearted about it. They thought it was a horrible clause, but they also felt that they'd spent years and so much money fighting being sued that they just had to stop the lawsuit because it was a waste of their own congregational funds, and they just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. And, they were very sad about it. They were very upset, and they were just already looking forward to the date 5 years hence when they would be able to have a relationship with their church brethren. But they were taking the disaffiliation clause seriously. Everyone I spoke to said they wouldn't fight it, because it is interesting that a lot of people think or assume that these clauses would not hold up in court. You couldn't tell someone that they can't be the religion that they want to be. And for Anglicans, as you know, I'm not Anglican, but the relationship with the bishop and the diocese is huge. So you can't really in this country tell people that. On the other hand, these people did make the agreement, and they said that they were going to stick to it. So it's a huge loss for 5 years. Clergy will probably lose their insurance because they only get insurance through their new Anglican polity so long as they are officially part of it. So once they lose that polity, they could also lose their insurance and benefits. And you can't be a part of any sort of larger outreach, or, if your diocese has a soup kitchen or homeless shelter or something like that, you can't take part in that. You can't contribute financially, so you can't be part of the mission efforts of the larger diocese. And the bishop can't come in for blessings as part of their annual visit. So it is it's a pretty big price to pay. And I think that these members who had signed these agreements wanted people to understand just how big of a price it is to pay, and how congregations that are negotiating should be prepared for a last-minute presentation of this clause.
Yeah, it seems it's a between a rock and a hard place, because if they didn't sign it, they'd still be fighting for 5 more years. And so they're thinking, well, we could fight for 5 more years, or we could just know in 5 years we get to be Anglican.
Right.
And so,
but I spoke with other people who said that the decision was easy for them. They would rather lose their property than lose their relationship with their bishop and the diocese. So,
So in your research, did you find this is more led by a bishop, or is this coming down from the 815, as we call it?
Well, you according to the people I spoke with, in one case, and this was again, we kind of know where these congregations are, but this was background information. But according to the people I spoke with, the diocesan negotiators said that it was a directive from on high.
Okay.
So they had not been negotiating with that in mind until, again, sort of the end of negotiations, when they thought that they had come to an agreement between the diocese and the vestry of one congregation, but they had to get it approved by, as you put it, 815. And at that point, they came back with word that they needed to have an additional clause.
Now, I saw your article October 7th, October 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, all till today I've seen responses to your article. Tell me a little bit about the response to your type of article, which was, it was, in honesty, a critical piece of what was happening, very informational, but I think 815 and the Episcopal Church took some offense to it.
First of all, I'm just happy that it made a response. When you're writing about legalese and canon law, what you kind of expect is that people are just going to fall asleep. Like, oh, that was a really nice article. So I'm glad that it at least did make an impact. And there were so many people that contacted me on Facebook or Twitter or email or whatnot and said, thank you for writing about it. Let me also tell you about what my congregation is going through. And it might not be that they're going through a disaffiliation requirement, but all sorts of other legal battles. So that certainly opened up my eyes to the breadth of the battle facing congregations that want to leave. But it also had, there were some responses, in addition to having a pretty high response on the Wall Street Journal site itself, there were some responses from the official Episcopal Church. They came up with talking points for people to use when discussing my article. They had a bishop from one diocese that has had quite a few congregations leave respond. And, that's interesting. And I've already known from having a lot of friends who are religion reporters that the national church body takes its image and narrative very seriously, and they are very concerned with the storyline that's told. And so I was totally expecting to have a response, and in fact, I was expecting perhaps more. The talking points I thought I could have written better talking points in response to my article.
Tell me a couple of the talking points.
Actually, I'm going to just pull over here
and
look.
Sure, go ahead. That's why we call this Anglican Unscripted.
Right, okay. So, hold on. Okay. Right, so the very first one, they basically said in the first point that my article's references were dated. Because the very first example I used was of a congregation that tried to leave the Diocese of Binghamton, or whatever I forget what that diocese is called.
It's the Diocese of Central.
Central. Okay. So 4 or 5 years ago, and what they thought that congregation thought that they had an agreement that when it came time for them to leave, they would just negotiate a property settlement and they'd be done. And much to their surprise, the diocese actually sued them for their assets and property. And I mean, they didn't just win; they took everything, and they had to, leave their property pretty quickly. And then they'd made a couple of different offers on the property. And what ended up happening is that the diocese sold the property for a fraction of the cost to a Muslim man who used it and turned it into a mosque and Islamic center. And that was the beginning of the story, because it's really a good way to explain what's going on.
Sure.
The Episcopal Church would rather have properties be sold and turned into mosques than go to these departing Anglicans. It's a really good, story to tell, and it's only, I don't know when that was, 4 or 5 years ago. It's not like ancient history here. There are all sorts of stories of property disputes coming out of the last few years, and I wanted to give context. And even if it is 5 years old or whatever, that doesn't in any way change its reality or whatnot.
Or the facts surrounding it.
Right. So the talking point was that the bishop had taken care of the situation. And I wanted to be like, yeah, he did. He took care of that situation.
We had the same situation here in Connecticut. I belong to Christ Church, Episcopal Church here in Watertown, and we decided not to even go legal. We would just give the bishop the keys to the church. And he took a $15 million property and sold it for $1 million to the local school. And the money was more important than trying to replant the congregation or anything like that.
Well, and I do want to say, I think it's important to understand the perspective of the people who are litigating these cases, and I wanted to make sure that the viewpoint of the presiding bishop was put in the article so people could understand. And from her perspective, this alternate Anglican polity is direct competition with her church body. And she says it's her job as presiding bishop to protect the church from competition. So whereas, and you can have your own viewpoint on whether that's valid or not, that she views this alternate Anglican polity as competition, but doesn't view other religious institutions or secular uses of these properties as competition. But that is her perspective. She's been very clear about it. She's spoken about it repeatedly over the years, and she's been deposed in as part of these lawsuits, and she's said what her perspective is. And I think it's important to get that perspective in there and just let her use her own words. And she is, so I tried to put that in there as well.
Yeah, I saw the interesting quote about whether or not she would prefer the church go Anglican or to a saloon.
Well, I was going to say, the second talking point was that she had never said what I had claimed she'd said. And there were certain things in my piece that were direct quotes and certain things that weren't direct quotes for everybody. And so it was not a quote that she said, I would rather this become, a stripper hall than a Anglican church. But what she did say, what happened was there was a deposition where she was asked, if she had any problem with it becoming a saloon, or whether there were any restrictions on a church property becoming a saloon. And there's like a little joke about how it certainly went the other way when she was Bishop of Nevada or something like that. And so she says there's no rule against it becoming a saloon. She would not issue a rule. And they ask about other church bodies, and they specifically reference Baptist churches. No problem with Baptist churches. And so that's why, and yet she does, the whole point of the deposition is that she does have a problem with these properties being taken by these alternate Anglicans. And so anyway, that's just a little sticking point, but I hope the Episcopal Church understands the difference between a direct quote with quote marks around it and a summary of hundreds of pages of depositions. So,
well, we're finding out more and more what they do understand and don't understand. Now, when you published the article, did you get any contact from 815, as we call it?
They responded publicly, and there may have been other communications, but I.
Oh, you can't discuss those. No problem. I understand.
The public discussion is sufficient, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Certainly finding other places to find money. I saw an interesting article about the National Cathedral and some money problems there. What's going on there?
Well, I'm going to have to look into that some more because it's very serious charges. There's two things going on. We did the story about the cathedral and how it's under its own foundation.
Right.
And then there's the Diocese of Washington, D.C., which is a federal corporation. It was chartered by Congress in 1896. So the foundation that owns the cathedral is a separate religious corporation chartered by Congress in 1893. And so they've got two separate religious corporations. They've got their own fundings. But what's happened is just recently you've had the dean of the cathedral resigned. Yeah. The Bishop of Washington stepped down, was replaced by a new bishop. And the chief operating officer for the cathedral also departed. So you have a vacuum at the top. And what's coming out is a lot of losses that were incurred by the cathedral. In 2009, they've cut things way back in 2010, so it's starting to get whole, but they don't have anyone on staff really yet to set things. With the earthquake, they practically had to close their doors to all the regular functions that bring in any kind of income for them. So they are going to be in a very precarious financial position. They've got $25 million worth of repairs to try to fund somehow. Meanwhile, the diocese itself is also not doing well. And it has filed this lawsuit against a trust, the Soper Trust, that was set up for it back in the 1970s to provide income. And the diocese in recent years started using that income to meet its budget. It's about the income from the trust requires for about a third of its budget, annual operating budget.
That's a lot.
Exactly. And its contributions have been going down, and so now it has filed suit to take over the trust itself, to take the funds under its wing, rather than leave them in the bank that is currently managing the funds and has grown them from about 11 million when the trust was originally started in the 70s to 26 million today.
Wow, that's a lot.
So the trust has been, the bank has been doing a pretty good job, but the diocese now wants to take it all over under its wing and say, oh, we'll make an endowment fund for it and keep it all separate. But of course, it's the difference. When it's in the trust, in the bank, and the diocese cannot get its hands on the principal. It can only deal with the income. But if it goes over to the diocese itself, all the corpus and the funds and everything like that, even if they pass a resolution making it an endowment fund, they can undo that in another year or so.
Sure.
And they get access to the whole corpus.
That's amazing. Yeah. All right, Alan, once again, you're the perfect man for the perfect story. I want to thank you for your time, and boy, I hope you get a week off sooner or later, but at this rate,
right.
we're going to be wearing down Skype real quick. Thank you again for your time.
Sure.
Thank you for watching Anglican Unscripted, episode 15. George and I really thank you for spending time with us. Obviously, we moved to the hour format. well beyond the 30 minutes that we normally allotted. And I just want to talk really quick about how important it is that you help spread the word about Anglican Unscripted. You saw, you watched, you laughed, you cried, but this is something we want to share with as many people as possible. We really want to grow our audience. And George, why is that really important?
Well, just like we received an email from a Ukrainian Catholic Church deacon who said, please don't talk about my church, but also said thank you for raising these issues that are of concern not just to Anglicans, but to Christians around the world.
Sure.
And it's heartening to hear things like that because it shows us where we should focus. Now, I love Episcopal and Anglican Church stuff. I could talk about it all day long, but there's a certain tolerance that people have. And so we need to focus on issues that are relevant and important and timely. And you guys need to help us find out what that is.
Yeah, and you can do that by emailing us. And one of the ways to do that is to send an email to AnglicanUnscripted@gmail.com, or you can comment on our videos if you go to facebook.com/AnglicanTV, and you're welcome to comment on the videos there or post messages to us. But when I travel around all the time, I meet people who watch Anglican Unscripted and really compliment the show, but we really want to hear back from you on a regular basis of what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, how we can improve it, and stuff like that. It's also important that you help us with contributions. You're looking right now at a link to a PayPal account that helps pay the expenses of Anglican Unscripted and Anglican TV in general. We need to be sure that we fund this project, that we keep it going, that we grow the audience. And George and I can only do as much as we can do, but getting the word about Anglican Unscripted is something that you can do. And we want to thank you for your time, and we'll see you camera side for episode 16.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.